very occasionally record podcasts, which you can find at anchor.fm/Grimstales.
Hello lovelies, today we're going to take a look at Mouseguard. I bought Mouseguard because I was trying to understand Burning Wheel better, and Mouseguard was sold to me as being a simpler, easier to understand, easier to play version of Burning Wheel. I managed to get this at a steal of a price, about 1/3 of the cover price, so I take it hasn't sold necessarily that well, at least here in the UK, which is a shame based on just looking at it, because the box set is a very nice thing. This also has the honour of being one of the few games other than Dungeons and Dragons and Fantasy Flight Warhammer games that I'd seen in normal bookshops. It never got bought in a couple of years of visits to the bookshop, but it was there. It got onto the shelves, so that's interesting. Right, let's take a look inside the box. Maybe it'll make a fart noise like it did earlier and startle the cats. No fart noise. Ah, well, can't have everything. Right, so we have a very nice box in which we have the core book, a GM screen of sorts that also has a bit of player-facing stuff as well. Some weasels and mice and things on it, and a partridge from the looks of it. We also get a little bit of extra rules and new missions here in another smaller book. You get a bunch of decks of cards which have the various actions and weapons and stuff for quick reference. Some nice dice, plenty of them. Not much of a fan of novelty dice, but as novelty dice go, not too bad. And then you get a bunch of NPC sheets and character sheets for the GM and the players. Right. We don't so much need to look at the rest of that necessarily, so I will just tuck that out the way. Okay, here is the core book. It is square format, fitting in the box quite nicely, and is about 320 pages. Now, that is actually good compared to Burning Wheel, so we're off to a good start. So yeah, the main book is a mercifully short 320 pages. There's no secondary character burner, and in fact the character creation is probably the smallest part of the book, all things considered. I'll flip through it, but what I'm saying will not necessarily have anything to do with the pages that I am displaying. So it's very pretty, thanks in large part to the art from the comics and the comic artist. I don't follow the comics, I don't know the comics, so most of that was lost on me, and I can't really speak to how accurate or lore following the game is compared to the comics, but it's a fairly simple concept to grasp, and I don't think you need to have read the comics necessarily to play the game. But yeah, it's certainly very pretty. It is lighter and easier to understand than Burning Wheel, but that's not really that much of a high bar to meet, because Burning Wheel, yeah, it has issues. Underneath all of the verbosity, there is a fairly elegant, simple system, as I said during my Burning Wheel review, where you just take a pool of 6-sided dice, or the special novelty dice. You roll them. 4, 5, or 6 is a success. 1, 2, 3 is a failure. You count your successes against the difficulty. If you beat the difficulty, you win. If you get more successes, you win more. And 6s can mean something special depending on the circumstance, and so on. Right? Really simple. But just like Burning Wheel, there's this beautiful, elegant, simple system but the whole game keeps tripping over its own deck with obscurationist language, faff, and a rule for every occasion, whether it's needed or not. The box is lovely, the art is lovely, the quality of the presentation and the paper and everything else is good. It's nice to have everything that you need in the box. The cards are a great idea, but they're actually less necessary in Mouseguard than they are in Burning Wheel. Yeah, there's that nice little GM screen with most of the stuff you need, I guess, though there's rules for everything, like I said. There's that nice little new book of rules and missions. That's a bit more like an art book, really. There's not a lot of content there. The pads for characters are nice. I usually find myself never using them because I don't want to mess them up, but for a lot of people, they're a good thing. The dice are quite nice, but they're useless for any other game. Though you could repurpose them for Burning Wheel, provided you stay on the black colour coding within Burning Wheel rather than grey or white. Now, it might surprise people that I was interested in this game enough to purchase it, or that I was interested in Burning Wheel enough to get another Burning Wheel-ish game to try and better understand Burning Wheel. So I understand why you might think that, but like it or not, and I don't particularly like it, Burning Wheel has been quite influential, and it was an RPG Net darling and so on for quite a while. And I try to have a library that doesn't just reflect my taste, but which reflects role-playing game history, and as a resource to draw upon. So yeah, it makes sense for me to own these things, because I want a representative library of what the gaming zeitgeist has been in various years. And yeah, I really did want to better understand Burning Wheel, because I feel like there is a good game in there somewhere behind all the nonsense that everybody else likes. And also, I do quite like twee things. I know everyone thinks me as Edgelord McEdgerson with my skull dice and my rings and everything else, but I grew up in the countryside, I live in the countryside. There is a part of me that likes that twee, chocolate boxy, thatched cottage and cozy English countryside thing. I love Peter Firmin's Diary of a Country Rat, for example. I loved Trouble for Trumpets. Forget the artist, unfortunately. I love Wind in the Willows. Frog and Toad I loved as a kid. So there's some appeal here for me in that it echoes a lot of that stuff. Plus, it does it in a more mature kind of fashion. Now, I actually think that's a bit of a problem, since when you see this on the shelves, it looks very much like it's a game for kids, but it isn't. There's quite mature themes in here. There's genuine peril for the characters. There's nasty animals which essentially become monsters. All the rest of it. Things die. It's not lovely necessarily. It's a bit more Watership Down, perhaps, than anything else. Which I live near as well, actually, the real Watership Down. So yeah, I think it might have appealed to kids from the way it looked, certainly if they weren't aware of the comics, and if their parents weren't aware of the comics. But then you find this somewhat mature game, and a game that is horrendously, needlessly complicated. Again, it's like Burning Wheel, it's like Tristat in that way, in which it hides and it obscures its beauty and elegance beneath all this nonsense. It's not written approachably. It's written with a rule for every occasion. More on that in a minute. But yeah, it's not for kids. System-wise, it's a little bit simpler than Burning Wheel. There are less statistics. There is a sort of catch-all statistic for most animals, including your mice, which is called nature, which applies to things that are within your animal nature. So for mice, that might be burrowing or hiding, scurrying, things like that. Whereas for a weasel, it might be biting or boasting or whatever else. So yeah, your animal nature is kind of front and center in a way that the kind of belief stats are supposed to be in Burning Wheel, perhaps. But you also get those other kind of emotional stats as well, which are supposed to drive gameplay, but which feel somewhat unnecessary to me in a lot of ways. Characterization is where that kind of stuff happens. I don't feel that you need to codify it in that way, though it is nice to be able to mechanically reward people for playing the right way, I guess. So it's catch-all stats, reduced stats. You don't really have wound levels and so on per se. It is more simplistic than Burning Wheel, but again, it layers stuff on top of that. And it has a problem that a lot of overly simple games do have, even though this isn't an overly simple game, in that it tries to address everything the same way. And I don't just mean a core mechanic. Here, that's in conflict, which is now any form of conflict, whether it's combat in particular or an argument or whatever. Everything uses basically the same system from argumentation in Burning Wheel. So you roll for your starting position, you grab as many bonuses and so on as you can, you make certain moves determined by the cards. Those play off against each other in certain ways depending on the nature of the conflict that you're doing, and then you get an end result which is likely to result in a win for one side but with compromises for the other side, unless you get an outright win. But it does that for everything. In some ways that's nice, that's good. It treats social interactions the same as combat interactions and everything else. I understand the perspective that tries to do that in quite a lot of modern games to play up the social side, even though that's usually where role-playing takes place. But I also think that there is a reason why combat tends to be the most heavily explained, complex rules sort of section of most games, right? And that is because combat, fighting, is generally the most high stakes thing that is going to occur in a game. It's when your character's life is on the line, unless you're playing 5th edition D&D, of course, where you are struggling to survive against an overt threat to your character's life. And as a games master, you don't want, unless you're one of those games masters, you don't want to just capriciously kill off the players. You don't want it to be your decision to kill off the players. You want it to be their decisions, their actions, and the luck of the dice that determines whether they die or not. Whereas this puts a lot of the load back onto the games master. This will be paradoxical, as we'll get onto in a minute, to decide who dies and when, what the results of the interactions and so on are, which means you're kind of forced into the position of being a capricious force of death at the table. And I think most games masters will tend to err on the side of letting people off, even when they should kill and finish off their characters, because there are no rules to hide behind here. It can't be that the weasel scored a critical hit that you happened to not be able to dodge, and the weasel rolled maximum damage. That's nothing that can be blamed on you as a games master. It's just the result of the system and some poor luck. But you don't have that to hide behind here, and that's why I think combat and other high stakes elements of games tend to have the most rules and the most mechanics to them, because you don't want to just leave that to GM fiat. Oh, you die, you live. That's not a nice position to be in. There's a lot of surrounding rules, same as there are in Burning Wheel, a few less, which does make it more approachable and more playable in a lot of ways. There's things like about the seasons and the weather and so on. There's lots of ideas and stuff here which you could lift and use in other games in a more simplistic fashion. So, I have a few more things I want to say about this. I had some interesting feedback on my video about Burning Wheel, and I had failed to take into account quite how annoying Burning Wheel fans are, like Apocalypse World fans, so to knock a point off its score on that review when considering the fan base, and I'm sure we'll have a similar issue here. But some interesting things were brought up nonetheless, right? That part of the design philosophy here, and in Apocalypse World, and in some similar games, is to undermine and remove the authority of the games master by creating rules for everything and creating a very strict structure on how things work. I don't like that style of play, right? I think it undermines the games master's authority, and you have to have someone at the table who can make those judgments, because there are always going to be edge cases and things outside the rules. There is no way you can make a rule for everything, so role-playing games should be about rulings rather than rules, in my opinion. And I think the leadership role, the judge role, the referee role of the games master is fundamentally important. So it's so heavy with rules, apparently, because they want to take that authority away from the games master and to codify and structure everything, which seems to be something that they find easier, whereas I, as a more improvisational games master, find that stifling. I think this is also the root of why I really don't like Apocalypse World, but we will get around to playing that on my Sunday games at some point, just to show you how awful it is. So I think there's a fundamental difference in philosophy there that is leading to something that is paradoxically both a narrative game and a rules-heavy game. And I think that is a problem, and it's why I don't get on with these games. But it does mean that there is a rule for everything, and there is this very strict structure of how Mouseguard is organised in play. The games master has a turn in which they present the obstacles. The players respond to those obstacles, and then the players have a turn in which they initiate the action. This seems to me like this is going to lead to very short, very unsatisfying, very undescriptive sorts of adventures, which are called missions. So maybe that's fitting. I don't know. Where everything becomes about maximizing your checks if you're a mouse player, and limiting what resources you use to put challenges in the way of the players, because you're essentially rationed. In something like Rune, that works because everyone's taking a turn being the games master essentially, and it's all about that kind of structured challenge. Here it wants to be a narrative game, but it's putting all these restrictions on you, like, okay, this season you can only use weather challenges this amount of times, then it changes to the next season, and players will have to do certain things, whether they're applicable or not, in order to get checks, in order to initiate actions on their turn, right? And that it just doesn't make sense. Well, it makes sense from that perverse point of view we already discussed. It doesn't make sense to me as a way to make a good or satisfying game. If you had fun with it, that's fine. I'm not saying you didn't or that you can't. I'm just saying that this approach is antithetical to my approach. Is there anything else to say here, really? Like a Burning Wheel could be saved by making it a little bit more of a traditional RPG and simplifying some of its elements. Mouseguard could be saved by removing some of the restrictions, making it more freeform. Again, treating it more like a traditional role-playing game. Apparently, there's a reason we've done things the way we have for so long. Who knew? Always worth pushing the boundaries, but I think things like Mouseguard and Burning Wheel prove that sometimes that doesn't work. Yeah, argument from novelty is just as fallacious as argument from tradition. Say, constantly kick the tires. I mean, this could do with like Burning Wheel with a better conflict system specifically for combat, things like that. It's kind of understandable why they don't want to in this, but you've got this rules-heavy approach clashing constantly with this narrativist approach. And I think that's the same problem that we run into with Apocalypse World. And I think Burning Wheel and Mouseguard, again, are similarly to Apocalypse World, played on that meta level, or supposed to be played on that meta level of we are telling a story together, rather than inhabiting your character, inhabiting a world, and having it react to your presence and your actions. Right? It's not about immersive play, it's about meta level play. I've banged on about that before. But anyway, scores. Style. This is a lovely thing. It's a lovely object. It's very tactile. It's very well put together. No complaints there whatsoever. Again, the obfuscatory language probably brings it down a notch. Style-wise, I would have given it 5 out of 5, especially at the price I got it. But again, because of the willfully confusing and obtuse language that could have been slimmed down a lot, I'm going to have to dock it a point there. So 4 out of 5 for style. In terms of substance, there is a lot here, a lot in the background and so on. A lot of it is very dry rules, unfortunately, for a game about little mice. But it is presented better and more completely than Burning Wheel is. So I guess I will end up around an average score of 3 for substance. Again, it's the presentation of it that lets it down, I think. So 4 for style, 3 for substance, 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5. If you want to understand Burning Wheel better, it's probably worth a buy. If you want to play cute animals, it's probably worth a buy. I would probably run it in my own setting because I don't know the comics, and I just appreciate the freedom for that more. So yeah, though we need to knock off a point for the Burning Wheel fan base. So 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5. Oh, and there's nothing about Wise's letting you call things into existence in here either. That seems to be entirely a confection of the forum, though I did find a very good deal on the more up-to-date version of Burning Wheel to add to my library, so I will have a look at that later. Zang. "Rrrr," said the grinder as it chewed its way through Alice from the crown of her head all the way down to her toes. It ate the lot of her, unfussy, snout to tail, and cleared its plate. It gnashed its way through her dress, her pinafore, her shoes, and her unmentionables. It chewed her hair, devoured her scalp, gobbled up her arms, wolfed down her legs, gorged itself on her torso, noshed on her skin, and gulped her down without so much as a burp to show for it.
Get some plastic surgery against this weak society. Entropy, apathy, morality, totality. Makeup of your final days. Survival of the fittest haze. Might is right on, bite on praise. Smoke and mirrors, twisted maze. Are you strong